Welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, the show in which we debate the major issues taking place in Israel. Our topics today are the human massacre at the Pittsburgh synagogue yesterday that left 11 people dead, and the escalation in Gaza with Islamic Jihad. Joining me in the studio are the director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman, expert on Arab affairs for Israel Hayom Daily, Dr. Reuven Berko, international council member for the New Israel Fund, Jacob Ner David, and executive director of Torah Tzedek, Rabbi Arik Asherman. A nightmare struck the Pittsburgh town of Squirrel Hill yesterday when a shooter opened fire at the Tree of Life synagogue during a baby naming ceremony during Shabbat morning services. This is the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in recent U.S. history. Squirrel Hill is located just east of downtown Pittsburgh and has the largest Jewish population in Pennsylvania, with nearly 50,000 people. According to witnesses before opening fire, the shooter yelled, "All Jews must die." 11 people have been killed and at least 6 wounded, including 4 police officers, and the 2 injured civilians are now in critical condition. FBI agent Bob Jones said this was the most horrific crime scene he'd ever seen in 22 years. The shooter was identified as Robert Bowers, who previously posted many anti-Semitic messages on social media sites, including the alt-right and racist site Gab. Federal prosecutors have charged Bowers with 29 federal counts, including 11 counts of murder and 13 counts of ethnic intimidation. The Israeli cabinet commemorated the attack with a moment of silence at the cabinet meeting this morning, and Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement on Saturday condemning the attacks.
The entire people of Israel grieve with the families of the dead. We stand together with the Jewish community of Pittsburgh. We stand together with the American people in the face of this horrendous anti-Semitic brutality. And we all pray for the speedy recovery of the wounded.
So the first question is, what can Israel do to show complete solidarity with the U.S. Jews during this time? Dr. Sherman, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's already started with at least the declarative and the ceremonial level. It's expressed solidarity, as you said, with the community. On the more operational level, I think perhaps there can be activities to beef up security in Jewish communities, cooperation with the FBI and other services, sharing intelligence, helping keep a closer watch on potential anti-Semitic activists, etc., etc. Perhaps it's a further thing how we can deal with the growing rift between the Jewish community, especially the liberal wing of the Jewish community, and Israel. But that, I think, is peripheral to this particular incident. So I think that's more or less what can be done. Expressions of solidarity, expressions of concern, expressions of condolence, plus on the operational level, beefing up security and cooperation and counterintelligence activities with the American authorities.
Rabbi Asherman, do you agree with this, and do you think that Israel is doing enough for the U.S. Jewry?
Well, first of all, I think all of us here extend our deep felt condolences and pain and wishes for recovery for the people who are injured. I have family there in Pittsburgh. It's very close and personal for me. I think it's very important that we realize at a moment like this, that we are Am Echad, we are one people. The statements that have come from across the board, and by the way, also from Ayman Audi, the head of the United Arab List, I think are very important. I think it's very moving that in Pittsburgh, the Christian and Muslim communities have also been outreaching to the Jewish community. I think mostly, beyond that, this is something that has to be dealt with in the United States. I think that we are seeing the fact that the United States is burning. It's burning with hatred. Since I made Aliyah, I've never, on principle, voted in an American election. I didn't think I had a right to do so. I used to have arguments with my mother, who used to say, Zichron Lebracha, who used to say, it's an obligation, not a right. I voted in the last election because I think there's a president in the United States that is encouraging hate.
Really?
I don't think he's anti-Semitic. The shooter said he was against Trump himself, but I think we have a situation where you see what goes around comes around. We're taught in the Midrash, don't also don't think that the hand that strikes the non-Jew won't eventually strike the Jew as well. I think I was very happy to hear a strong statement from President Trump. I hope he's going to do some tshuva, and I think it has to be, in America, there has to be a clear statement that hate is not acceptable, and the leaders cannot be fomenting hate, even if it's not against Jews, because what goes around comes around.
But why would you say it's fomenting hate? On what basis? I can see nothing. He married an immigrant. His daughter's Jewish. He's got blacks in his cabinet. Really, that's just
this brings up a very
clutching at
interesting point.
straws.
Is there a risk that this issue will become too politicized?
It's not a risk, it's a certainty.
Well, hopefully not. But I think in terms of dialing down hatred, so if you look into this particular guy and what was really moving him or impacting him, one of it was the issue of immigration. If you look back in his posts, and in fact the post that he wrote just before he went out to do this heinous deed, he talked about preventing immigration, preventing invaders from coming in, and specifically reacting to HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. So I think in general, and yes, I think President Trump does have responsibility to help dial down the hatred and the rancor around immigration and issues like that rile people up and get them to act out like this.
How would he influence Louis Farrakhan?
Dr.
One short point I
Same
would
thing.
add to this clever things that we have heard, that parallel to this attack that we saw in Pittsburgh, southern Israel suffered parallel to this from endless rockets, some tens of rockets that has been launched towards the Israeli settlements in southern Israel. And it is not occasionally the same motivation has led those in Hamas who suffer from deep anti-Semitism and this attack. We can show this motivation appears in different ways. Some of them call it purely anti-Semitism. Some of them call it anti-Zionism, but it is the same haters that push all these Sonei Israel to act in the same way, to kill Jews at the end of the day, whether they support BDS or not, whether they support and fully identify with Palestinians. Those who attack the Jews do not make any difference whether they support Palestinians or not. They share some of humanistic ideas. The result is the same. Those who want to kill Jews do this, whether in Israel, whether in America, whether in Europe, in which the Europeans permanently, for the time being, appear as anti-Zionistic. But we all know the roots of anti-Semitism deep in that society as well.
I would like to answer the question in terms of what President Trump has done to help foment hate. I think
Actually, let's keep it focused. Let's respond to this. In what way is the Israeli government responding? And are they doing enough? Naftali Bennett went last night to show his support.
I was pleasantly surprised to see that he left to go try and attend some of the funerals and be with the community, and that was a wonderful step by Minister Bennett. I think if you look, though, and I really would hate to put this on this and use this as a leverage point, but if you look in terms of, and Martin pointed out the rift, which I think is a real issue between the American Jewish community and Israel and growing rift. If you look at what Deputy Minister Michael Oren wrote, which is he said that Minister Bennett's visit is great, but maybe it's time, the State of Israel, to really look at the American Jewish community and embrace the American Jewish community for what it is, which we do not do. We constantly insult the American Jewish community. So if this is a step in the right direction, wonderful. In terms of anti-Semitism, I would broaden it, by the way, to, and this I think Israel and the American community, Israel and America, not American Jewish community, but Israel and America, should be aligned closer together to work against people that use terror and use violence, and I would call it not just Sonei Israel, not just haters of Israel, but Sonei Chaim, haters of life. And that goes whether it's Islamic Jihad, Hamas, or anybody else.
Some other people of life,
yes.
They like to live. You see, the man
well, actually,
is surrounded. He didn't commit a suicide, didn't give up his life.
Right, not clear whether he was a suicide, or he either thought he was committing suicide or not.
We do have to move to the next topic. If we could just go around and say one last sentence about this particular issue, Dr. Berko.
Well, I don't think that the only thing I think that should develop out of this is more steps to avoid this. I interpreted, I'm not that good in English, but he said, I'll penetrate to this place despite the optics. The optics seems to me that he was aware to the option that he's being observed by some system of bitachon,
Surveillance.
but he was not, unfortunately, and this is something that I would add the steps to be taken in order to obtain security for the community. More steps in security.
Thank you. Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, in the face of such horror and sadness, we can only look for, little points of light. And I think, as Rabbi Ashman said, there was such a coming together so far, and I think we'll see more of the whole community coming together, that I think that's what we need to focus on. Obviously security, but the coming together, I think, is the important part.
Rabbi Asherman?
I think I'd love it. I'd be so, if there's anything out of this tragedy, if it comes to a point where it does bring Jews from across the globe closer together and Americans closer together, then maybe we'll look back and say this was a turning point. Again, I think if you look at the president's statements in Charlottesville, campaign statements about Mexican rapists and killers, those things created hate, but maybe, just maybe, he also realizes now, and I hope so, that his job as president of America is to bring people together, to condemn hate, to be consistent, whoever the victims are, and maybe even rethink his position on gun laws.
Dr. Sherman?
Well, I would like to think that we could focus on the human tragedy, the aspects of the human tragedy, rather than exploit that human tragedy for political purposes, because there's enough blame to go around on left and right in inciting violence, and no one really gets upset when it's left violence against rightists. For instance, the shooting of the Republican senator, the Republican congressman or senator who was shot for being a Republican, the incitement to violence from democratic representatives across the board. So I think that the left should be very, very wary about accusing the right of inciting violence, because there's enough blame to go around. And I think that we should focus on the human aspects of this tragic incident rather than exploiting it for political gain.
Moving on to the next topic, the IDF has issued a statement that Islamic Jihad, under orders from Iran and the Revolutionary Guards al-Quds forces in Syria, sent 36 rockets from Gaza into Israel on Friday night. In response, the IDF hit 87 Hamas targets on Friday and 8 Islamic Jihad targets on Saturday. Later on Saturday, Egypt brokered a ceasefire deal with Israel and the Islamic Jihad. Now, Hamas reportedly has demanded $15 million each month to prevent continued violence on the border. At the weekly Security Cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said he will not accept Hamas's ultimatum. Now, many on the opposition, including Tzipi Livni, have stated that a political solution to Gaza could have occurred in 2009 by allowing the PA to stop funding Hamas, which would have allowed Abbas's security forces to take over the Gaza Strip.
I think it will be a little bit funny because it will last for just a few days, and then all of this situation will keep on in the same. I think until the moment both sides of us will sit and talk one to each other, then maybe it will end.
We really suffers from all of the airplanes that goes around and all of the bombs. Of course, this is something that has to be solved more seriously, but for now, it's really good for us to have a little bit of quiet.
Dr. Burko, so first of all, do you agree with Tzipi Livni's statement, and what is Netanyahu's long-term strategy in Gaza?
Actually, I didn't understand what Tzipi Livni was saying. I followed her statements for a long time, and she was near she was at the government a long time ago. She didn't contribute anything to this conflict for a long time, and all these statements doesn't mean anything. We are facing an illness that cannot be healed. This is a permanent a desire to destroy Israel, and so many actors are in the game that you cannot take into account all of them. But even if I count the most important one, which is Abu Mazen would like us to face and to strike Hamas, just because he wants to unify the roles of what's so-called the Palestinian people, who are actually not people. They are divided into so many streams, so many tribes. They cannot be unified any longer. They have never been unified ever along history. So he wants us to strike them and to use the Israeli soldiers' blood to reunify the territories, a fact that he cannot achieve by his own abilities. He was there at the past. He was thrown out of the roofs. His people were shot, and they ran away to our arms at that time. So we are now have to choose what to do in a chronic disease, which I call Hamas a chronic disease. Nobody can heal it. We are facing other actors, such as Iran, who actually interested that we will be buzzed in another front to take our efforts from the north. I mean Syria, Hezbollah, and others. We are now facing efforts by Egypt, which is threatened also by the Muslim Brothers branch, which is Hamas, and Jihad Islamic terrorist movements. So this is a very complicated combination, which our policy should be to maintain the conflict. We cannot heal it. We cannot solve it. We can strike from time to time just to build up our deterrence. This is the main idea. I believe that the Israeli government will not get into Gaza for any purpose, but to strike from the air and consist these deterrents, and they need it from time to time. We have to supply goods for the population, but we should not let any possibility for the Hamas movement to gain power and to be strengthened anymore. This is
Dr. Sherman, do you agree with Dr. Berko that the goal is to maintain rather than to allow it to push forward?
Well, I agree with many things that Reuven said, but overall, I disagree on one thing. I think the problem in Gaza is not operational. As I've said before, it's conceptual. And the question is how you perceive the Palestinians. If you perceive the Palestinians as a prospective peace partner, you will lead the country time and time again, as we've done for a quarter of a century, into a bloody impasse. On the other hand, if you perceive them as an implacable enemy and derive your policy from that, then there may be a solution. The bottom line is, and I don't want to sound too radical, but the bottom line is, I think the last quarter of a century has proved there will either be Arabs in Gaza or Jews in the Negev. Over the long run, there will not be both. The only long-term strategic solution for Gaza is for the IDF to prove it really is the strongest army in the Middle East, to invade Gaza after an aerial bombardment, after designating safe areas for non-belligerents, take over Gaza, dismantle the Palestinian, the Hamas leadership, and start on a broad international campaign of incentivized immigration to move non-belligerents to third-party countries outside of the circle of violence and free from the clutches of the cruel, corrupt cliques who've led them astray for decades. Because if we haven't learned anything in the last quarter of a century, then we're in a problem. Gaza is the ultimate indictment of the two-state solution, the imbecilic attempt to try and foist statehood on what Reuven correctly described as an amalgam of disunited clans and gangs and tribes. It will never work. If it hasn't worked in a quarter of a century, we should realize it's not going to work, and we should stop inflicting this on the Palestinians. The greatest enemy that the Palestinians have are the people who went for land for peace. And we must understand that if Gaza is the greatest indictment of the two-state solution, Sinai is going to prove the greatest indictment of land for peace. Because as soon as the Ethiopians start pumping water out of the dam on the Blue Nile, Egypt's going to have no resources and no resolve to impose law and order on Sinai. It'll have to be worrying about what's going on in Cairo and Alexandria, and Sinai will descend into even a more brutal place than it is, abutting Gaza. And that's the realities that we have to gear for.
Jacob, how do you respond to Dr. Sherman?
Shortly would be difficult, but I think, fascinating is that you start with escalation, but we ended with ceasefire, right? So there is somebody to talk to because we reached a ceasefire with them. Now, you could say an implacable enemy. If it was truly implacable, then there wouldn't be a ceasefire.
No, they just use it to enhance their ability.
Obviously we're coming into, we're in the period between the yahrzeit and the civic commemoration of Rabbeinu alav shalom, who famously said you don't make peace with your friends. I don't know.
Make peace with defeated enemies.
And we've defeated our
But
enemies.
in the case of Hamas, this is a radical Islamic movement that declares that he wants to demolish and destroy Israel, not to talk to it. And believe me, this is my subject on my doctoral dissertation. I know for sure they do not intend to negotiate with you ever and ever.
So I don't have a doctorate in Hamas, but I think all of us have seen, though, that the Israeli government does negotiate with Hamas. We have negotiated with Hamas. We do negotiate.
We are doing it by Egypt.
With Hamas.
We are doing it by Egypt.
We've also
misled to believe that
we've also negotiated
Rabbi
directly.
Asherman, how do you? What are your two cents here?
I think first of all, we've seen I agree with what you said that we've seen a series of failed policies. We tried to encourage people to leave back in 1967. It didn't work.
We didn't try it enough.
We tried time after time to use a deterrence, and we said every time, this is going to be the last time we're going to have to go in. Last war, we didn't even say that. We just said it's a matter of time until we'll have to go in again.
We do actually have to wrap up. So
we are taught
statement.
in Pirkei Avot to Rabbi Natan, who's the strongest, the mightiest of the mighty, the person who makes a friend out of an enemy. The one thing we haven't tried is what people from the right wing, like Yisrael Katz and others, have said, to serious humanitarian relief to change the dynamic in Gaza. It may not work, but it's the one thing we haven't tried.
Jacob, just one sentence to wrap up.
I think we've got to have a plan moving forward, and a plan moving forward can't be simply to maintain ongoing violence.
Okay. Well, we actually have to wrap up. Thank you very much for your insight today. That's all the time we have. And a special thanks to our guests, Dr. Martin Sherman, Dr. Reuven Berko, Jacob Ner David, and Rabbi Arik Achterman. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and visit our website, iltv.tv. I'm Yael Shir, and thanks for watching.